But to think that way, to approach things that way as a marketer, as a founder, as a product or customer marketer is really short-sighted, and you're robbing yourself of a lot of profit and opportunity. So this framework, super simple. It's a framework that can help you rethink that and re-engineer these assets to breathe life into them across the entire buyer's journey.
Today on Strategy Shorts, I'm joined by the wonderful Joel Klettke. He is the founder of Case Study Buddy and a bit of an AI whiz, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. Joel, great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Joel, before we go into the details of today's episode, because I know you've been thinking about an insight framework that you want to share with the audience, but I'd love to know a little bit more about your background. So it'd be great to hear more about where you came from and what you've been doing in the world. But it's worth me saying just off the bat that I discovered you in sort of an unusual way. As I was scrolling through my LinkedIn feed, there were these eye-popping AI generated visuals, and I had no idea they were generated by AI until you revealed your trick. But I thought, man, this guy is just an absolutely awesome graphic designer. So I'd love to hear a little bit more, yes, about your business background and what you're doing. But then after that, why don't you tell us a little bit about that AI content generation story and the kind of traction that's been getting for you?
Sure, yeah. So in short, my background, I entered the digital world originally in SEO, a job that I didn't know existed till it was mine. Worked agency side for almost 5 years, then pursued my true first love, which was writing. Finally saw a business case for it. And so I went out on my own in 2013, freelancing, writing content, originally blogs, white papers, ebooks, that kind of thing. Within 2 years, I'd transitioned to kind of really focus on the conversion and direct response side of copywriting and following in the lead of Joanna Wiebe at Copy Hackers. And then, based on a project I did there, recognized an opportunity for an agency just really focused on the challenges of customer stories. How do you get them done? How do you manage all the moving pieces? How do you make them scalable? How do you bring those conversion elements into that storytelling? And that's when Case Study Buddy was born. So almost 8 years ago now, we really focus on the end-to-end production process, but also the strategy. We work with a lot of B2B companies who are looking to just capitalize on these assets across the entire buyer's journey, which we'll get to later. That's the framework I want to share, and a really simple way of putting these assets to use and driving more ROI. But the imagery side of things. So it's funny you say the graphic designer thing, because that's, for me, I've always expressed myself best in words and in like verbal and written communication. I always wanted to be good at drawing or design, but never really found my footing in that. Then the emergence of kind of AI and it comes along, and I started playing around with Mid-Journey, mostly just out of curiosity and not wanting to be oblivious to what I see as this like seismic shift. So I was playing around with that and kind of getting some interesting imagery, but I found it challenging because you still had to really kind of engineer prompts and no weightings and all of that different thing. Well, back in October, I decided to take LinkedIn a little bit more seriously, wanted to get more traction there, wanted to generate more awareness, build more of a community. Problem was I didn't have any visuals to go with my posts, and I wanted to. I thought, well, it's free real estate. You might as well have something to go. Right around that time, ChatGPT integrated with Dolly. And the amazing thing was you can give like a plain language prompt and it will spit out something really compelling. So I thought, well, let's give this a go. And I was blown away by how simple it was to create stuff that I looked at and thought, that's really cool. That's really, eye catching. So I started originally, you can look in the post history, kind of just off the wall. I had like a Muppet funeral, and then I had like, a monster chasing a person through woods and a big pixel art, like sea monster thing. But then I started finding some consistent elements. I thought, can I make this more of like a personal brand? And so I took kind of the plaid shirts that I often wear, kind of the square frame glasses. I have the benefit of being like a fairly generic looking bald white guy. And so I put that all together and started iterating on styles, whether it was like claymation or pixel art or impressionist, but bringing those same elements back over and over and over. And I started to share the output of that over and over and over. And people started to notice that, hey, this is kind of like a consistent thing. People started to almost tune in as much for the imagery as for the content. So I went from a place of not generating a whole lot, not very active, to over the past 90 days, nearly 400,000 impressions, which coming from, not a whole lot, it is pretty solid. A lot of engagement and some opportunities. So obviously I'm here talking about the AI part of it, but podcast invitations, we have had business inquiries. And again, I've had people kind of comment on the imagery, but also then in the DMs, be talking about, well, can you help us with customer stories and some actual, lead volume? Like I can probably peg at least, mid five figures of opportunities to just both being present on LinkedIn and then this associated kind of AI imagery strategy. So that's a lot of me talking, but that's how that kind of emerged, came together, and that's some of the benefit I'm seeing on the back of it.
As you've been talking, I've been thinking already there's loads of value in what you're sharing with us. And a couple of things I just noted down. There's a thing there about that of sharing whilst you're learning. Like that's exactly what you've done. You've been experimenting with these new tools and just talking about it. And that's a really, really important thing. There are so many new tools out there, so many new ways to introduce content online, so many new tools around AI. And actually, by practicing that stuff and sharing and talking about it as you learn it is going to help a whole bunch of people. So I think, if you're on LinkedIn right now and you're thinking, oh, how am I going to engage more people and share more value? Actually, just share the story of what you're learning at that time might be a really, really good way to do that. And you're right about the kind of conversations that this kind of thing attracts because, yes, I first reached out to you or first took notice of you because of the imagery. But then as I explored Case Study Buddy and your wider initiatives and enterprises, I suddenly thought, I actually do need to speak to Joel. I think he'd be a great person for Strategy Shorts. And it's amazing the kind of conversations sharing your learnings as you go can unlock. So it's great to have you here. We kind of already shared a bunch of strategy shorts right there. And I do suggest anyone listening or watching, find Joel on LinkedIn. I'll add his profile in the show notes because, you've got to see some of these images. They're really, really cool. And, you know, the look you just referred to, the plaid shorts, the glasses, the kind of the baldness, you know, it's all there. It just fits and it lends itself to iconography and animation in a really wonderful way. But what we're not supposed to be talking about today is AI. We're actually supposed to be talking about something else. And I know that you've been thinking of a framework, a tool, insight that you'd like to share with the audience. So, first up, before we get to what the framework is or what the approach is, yeah, what is it? And who are you speaking to? Like, who's your target listener or viewer for this episode?
So this framework is really, it can span a few different roles, but we'll start from a goal perspective and then back to a role perspective. So the goal perspective is this: customer success stories for so many companies, especially B2B companies, get created once, they get used in one place, they get shared one time, and then they kind of rot on the vine. They don't drive a lot of ROI because they don't get used. There's also been this perception in marketing that case studies are end of journey assets, end of funnel assets, if you will, that they're only really brought in when someone is close to making a purchase to sort of nudge them over the line. And lots of different roles share that perspective. Founders of smaller companies often look at it that way. Marketers, even CMOs, product marketers, customer marketers, they've kind of been lulled into this thinking where, okay, my customer stories, they live on the resources section of my site. We give them to the sales team, they deploy them near the end of the conversation, and that's that. But to think that way, to approach things that way as a marketer, as a founder, as a product or customer marketer is really short sighted, and you're robbing yourself of a lot of profit and opportunity. So, this framework, super simple. It's a framework that can help you rethink that and re engineer these assets to breathe life into them across the entire buyer's journey. So, that's sort of who it's for. That's the goal we're trying to achieve. And the super simple framework is nibble, bite, snack, meal. And what I mean by that is thinking about the informational appetite of your audience across that buyer's journey. In other words, how hungry are they? And what information are they hungry for? For example, the traditional case study, let's call it the long form 1500 word deep dive. That's the meal. That's the biggest sort of asset you're going to present. That's great for someone who's hungry for a lot of context, a lot of detail, someone who maybe is nearer to the end of the purchase journey. But what about people at the outset who are just in consideration or you've just made contact with through cold outreach, let's say? Well, they might be ready for more of something like a nibble. They might be ready for, say, a single soundbite from that story or a quick 10 to 15-second video. That's just one quick quote that's enticing, sort of whets the appetite for more. Once someone has sort of been intrigued by whether it's a name drop of the brand or a quick share of the metric or a quick quote like a nibble, then maybe they're hungry enough to have something like a one sheet. So something very simple in terms of about 350 ish words, high level. We're not going deep into the weeds, but something that gives them a little bit more context. And you can deploy those one sheets earlier in conversations. You can also, though, deploy that type of nibble when you have an existing customer who already knows all of that deep dive information, but maybe you have an upsell or a new service. All they really need is a nibble. They don't need all of that context. Then when we get into so we've had kind of the nibble, the bite would be this sort of one sheet. The snack is something a little bit more substantial. Maybe they're not ready or hungry enough for this deep dive, but maybe they're looking for yet more context. So there again, we might have a deeper dive than a one sheet, more of a, we call it a snapshot, or you might have your 2 minute video that gives a bit of an account of the story. But the whole point of this framework is to think about, where am I engaging this lead or customer? What informational appetite do they have? So, how much and what is it? How can I repurpose this same story in different ways to now cater to those different appetites? Can I pull out the quotes and just make nibbles? Can I take the high level points and just make these bites? Can I take the audio or the video, just put together a bit of a snack for them, something that will meet them in that arena, whether it's on social, whether it's an email, and then the full meal at the end? Can I have this deep dive sort of, 1500 word or longer video for people who want that? And then once you have a few stories, can you present them with a buffet? So can you bring these things together and repurpose them yet again into something like a nuclear deck? So a deck full of one sheets or quotes from multiple different people in the same industry or people with the same role. So nibble, bite, snack, meal, and eventually buffet. Really simple framework for rethinking how you approach your customer stories and how you deploy them across multiple channels and different marketing and sales scenarios.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of just taking this away from that end moment or that kind of final phase and thinking about your customer stories as living, breathing, sustaining, vitamin giving bits of nourishment that you can use in all sorts of different contexts. And like you say, using them with people who are already familiar with your brand, but actually it's good to refresh that relationship with, hey, here's this other really cool thing we've done recently. I'd love to tell you more about it, as an example. I also loved what you were talking about, the use of videos. And one things that I've done in previous companies that I've worked for is when we had like long form content, but actually the design pressure of rethinking how you would reformat that in a written way, we overcame that by actually just using things like Loom. And so you've got the deck and you do a voiceover, and just for like 3 minutes, you say, "Hey, I'm going to send you this whole thing, but I just wanted to highlight like a couple of things," and actually use the video and the voiceover just to call out and turning that meal-sized asset into those nibbles and those bite-sized pieces. So I think that's a really good way in to rethinking about that longer form content.
I think people also miss some of the opportunities to deploy too. Like people often ask once they know the framework, well, where else can we leverage these? And there's some surprising places where it can work really well. So, for example, in your remarketing advertisements, we've all basically assumed that a landing page or a sales page is the best place to push people. We had a client instead push people into relevant stories based on their visiting habits or things they'd expressed interest in. They converted quite well. We've seen stories used in kind of what you were alluding to, which can be win back or retention or going back to leads that have gone cold. So if they've expressed interest in a particular part of what you do, re-engaging that lead with a story saying, "Hey, is this still a priority for you? Here's a story of someone who took action and got that outcome you were looking for at this time." So whether it's remarketing, cold outreach, win back, or even just internal, that nibble bite snack meal. Your own staff and your new hires may want some context on, what does a great win look like? What does a happy customer sound like? What kind of language do they use to describe their positive outcomes? And there can be that whole internal use case. So it's not just, the places we've become used to sharing it on the site or dropping it on social, you can use these in ads and outreach and nurturing and win back and all of those different places. And the same framework will help you.
That's it. I think what's really interesting, I love the turn of phrase used earlier, by the way, informational appetite. And I think when you are going through your analytics and your data sources and you're observing where people are spending their time, if somebody is clearly engaging with this kind of content, this case study content, you're right. Maybe the best place isn't to push them to another landing page or another closed page. Give them the thing that they're already engaging with, which is a story. And that might be the thing that actually closes them or gets them to respond to a call to action. So, informational appetite, observing how people are engaged, can tell you what thing they need next in a way that perhaps a traditional lens on analytics just isn't going to get you there. You need to sort of think differently about this opportunity. Now, we're coming into land, Joel, and I know that you've got kids running around that you need to get back to. But we love to finish every episode with something really practical and tangible, a starting point that people can take away and try. If somebody was going to finish this episode and take action immediately, what's the one thing that they should do first?
I would say the one thing you should do if you have a customer story already, because it's probably in a long form, go just try to turn it into a one sheet. Take that as a starting point. See what the experience is like, kind of in the same way we talked about playing and mucking around with AI. See what it's like to take this bigger piece and turn it into something more concise that has a lot of utility. If you don't have a customer story, then the one thing that you should do today is either whether you are the sales team or you have a sales team, just tap a leader on the shoulder and say, hey, who do we have who's had a recent win? And get the ball in motion capturing your first story and approach the storytelling from the beginning with this nibble bite snack meal. So depending on which bucket you fall into, there's a quick action point that you can go and do.
Joel, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I really, really appreciate it. And it's awesome that we found a time, because I know that you and I have been trying to find a slot together for a few weeks. So I'm glad 2024 made it happen for us. So thanks for coming on, and let's speak again soon.